Hello there, Riderflex Nation. Steve Urban here with more career advice and job interviewing tips for you. And as a quick reminder, if you enjoy our podcast, please remember to subscribe to our channel and like the episodes. And on today's podcast, we have Heather Jackson, the co-founder and CEO of Realm of Caring Foundation, which is a 501c3 not-for-profit organization which provides support services for individuals using cannabinoid therapy. Heather, thank you so much for being on the call today. Great to chat with you. Tell the listeners a little about yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for the introduction, and thanks for having me on. I think this is super exciting. So about me, that's quite a can of worms.
Well, you are a fascinating personality, so I definitely want the listeners to get a chance to know you. So yeah, go for it. Everything from where you're from and family and all that.
Oh, absolutely. Okay. Let's do it, Steve. So, I'm a military brat. So we moved around a lot. This was, I think, before the Army figured out that you needed to be grounded. Gotcha. We moved every year for the first, probably 7 years of my life, which I think was, in retrospect, everything's helpful, right? Mm-hmm. So I think it helped me, be open and willing to talk to people and make new friends, especially when you're young. That's really hard. Mm-hmm. So life kind of, started out that way, but I've been in Colorado since then, since the first grade. Okay. And I've always been industrious. My first job was when I was 11, probably a little bit before that. I remember collecting horny toads by the railroad tracks and selling them, taking the horny toads. I would they've got those little claws. I'd connect them to my shirt and ride around with my bike, ring the bell, and sell them for like a quarter.
That's awesome.
And started a paper route when I was 11. The Gazette used to give certain streets to kids and started babysitting after that and started working right away when I was 16. So I've always been, super industrious and really, really enjoyed having purpose and putting in work. I'm married to my high school sweetheart. I actually married the first boy I kissed. So I've been with my husband since I was 15.
Is that right? I didn't know that. By the way, I met him at the event. Great guy. Me and Scott, we had a cocktail with him. Yeah, awesome guy. By the way, huge guy.
He puts up with me. He's huge. Yeah, we don't grow them small at my house. That's what you see our kids, and you're like, okay, I got it. So we had our, we've been together for 28 years. We had our first kiddo at 21 early. And when I was 21 years old, and he's 21 years old now. It's awesome. It's so cool to grow him up, to throw your heart and soul into your kid. And then we had another one, so he's 16. So we have two boys. Gotcha. And we've got our youngest son has a pretty severe medical condition. I'm sure we'll get a little bit more into that. And so a good decade was spent just trying to keep Zakai alive. And that was my job. I had no other purpose but to make sure Zakai was okay. And what
was the separation in age between your oldest son and your youngest? How many years?
So 5.
5. Okay. Gotcha. Mm-hmm. I was trying to remember what the gap was there with Zakai. Yeah. Okay. Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. Let's go into that. Let's assume there's listeners for this podcast that have no idea what Realm of Caring is or, what you went through. Yeah, if you don't mind,
sure.
not to get too personal, but if you can just walk through, what that was like.
I think it's great. I mean, it's how the organization started. It's why Realm of Caring exists. So I think it's pretty relevant. Our youngest, Zakai, started having seizures when he was 4 months old. And by the time he was 5, he had over 500,000 seizures, if you could imagine.
Oh,
so
God.
Some of these are super quick seizures, imagine kind of paddles to the chest, clear, full body electrocutions, like super quick, super violent seizures. He had 6 different seizure types.
Wow. And the first one started at 4 months old, you said?
Yeah, 4 months old. And I didn't recognize him as a seizure. When we went for the 6-month well baby checkup, I'm like, he's kind of doing this thing. And we got another kind of full round of immunizations, and it really hit the fan after that. And And then we started getting testing done and figured out, okay, these are seizures. By definition, more than one is epilepsy. So we knew we were dealing with epilepsy.
I see.
And we had gone through a few specialists before we discovered the diagnosis of what's called DOSA syndrome, which is, just a rare catastrophic form of early childhood epilepsy.
Wow!
And,
That was obviously a huge blow right there for the doctor to inform you guys of that. I can't imagine when that diagnosis happened. How old was Zakai?
So seizure started at 4 months. He was about a year and a half when we received the diagnosis, and so we were, trying to figure out. And actually, I'm a really avid researcher, and so would be our second neurologist, I came in and said, this is actually what I think he has, and wanted him to confirm that by the EEG, which is just an electrical scan of the brain. And he did. And so that, we received it, which is great. It's a blow, but it's also, you really need to know what you're dealing with. And I'm a real, I'm not a put your head in the sand kind of girl. It's like, what are we dealing with here? What is prognosis? That helps with treatment plan. That helps me create community, which is what my world revolves around. So, it was actually really good. It was sort of, comforting. Yeah.
Yeah, you don't strike me as the type of person to stick your head in the sand, by the way. I know you just a little bit. I could almost visualize you walking into the doctor's office saying, "Hey, listen, I'm pretty sure this is what's going on. I need you to confirm." I can almost see you doing
and me and my chart, Steve, I was like, not only that, I've got, here's what his seizures look like on pie charts, and let me just show you what's going on here. So yeah, that's kind of, that is definitely me. So, that's what we were up against. And, one of the things that I did do in those 10 years, like 9.5 years that Zakai was really sick, was create a separate nonprofit for his syndrome. And we tried to look into, it's genetic, but we don't know the genetic markers. And so we wanted to, get some research accomplished to figure that out. We still, it's like looking for a needle in a haystack. So we haven't figured that out yet, but that was sort of my first introduction to nonprofit back then. But in July of 2012, it was actually our hospice, our palliative care counselor, who mentioned another family who reminded her a lot of Zakai. And this family was doing better, and they were using cannabis. And so it was pretty, back then it was kind of shocking for the hospice counselor to say, and she was really like, look, I could lose my job, but I'm never going to forgive myself. Like, I'm not recommending this. Here are some phone numbers, kind of do what you want with it. And that was kind of all she wrote.
Bless her for sharing that information, right? I mean, wow.
I know.
That was great. And so at that time, when she mentioned that, what was your reaction? I mean, you and your husband, were you like, what? Like, what are you kidding? Or how did you react to that?
I've always been, the girl with the plan B. And so I was so interested in having just another option.
I see.
And so immediately I started researching. So of course it's shocking because you think, well, cannabis, like, we need every single brain cell we've got here. Like, I'm a byproduct of the 80s, the egg in the frying pan, and
right,
you're going to be killing your brain cells. And I'm like,
I remember those commercials.
Yeah, of course. So it's kind of like, well, what are you talking about cannabis? But as soon as, like, one of my ways of staying sane when I was trying to keep Zakai alive was research. And so I just got on PubMed. This is the National Institute of Health holding a house, the library of all this research. And I just got on and started researching it. And if you put in cannabis and epilepsy, especially back then, you're going to find some early studies that was literally light at the end of a very, very dark tunnel for me. Mm-hmm. And so I learned about cannabidiol, which I had no idea that's what we'd be giving Zakai. I was just in the research phase at that point.
Gotcha.
And that it is an anticonvulsant. And then I could learn safety information, like safety data, lethal dose ratings, things like that. So I got to a point where, for me, I knew that I wasn't going to kill him, and that the seizures would, and that there was a small possibility, even in these really small trials that were done in other countries, that this could work. But mostly I was looking at it, again, palliatively. My son was suffering. And if we could, reduce that was the goal.
Gotcha.
And so I did bring it up to my husband, who probably thought I had gone over the edge at that point. What are you talking about, Heather? He was definitely, not on board. Initially, the response was, really. And so I shared with him the research. I talked to my folks about it. And that's the interesting thing too, like the stigma associated with cannabis, especially back then. I didn't run a single drug by my folks. Right. I never called and said, hey, doctor's wanting to give Zakai, we went through 17 treatments, different pharmaceutical options. I never thought I needed to call my mom about it.
Right.
So it just kind of tells you. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. My parents are the same. I think, my parents and yours are probably similar ages. Yeah. I can't even have the conversation with my mother, actually.
Yeah. She's the biggest cheerleader now. My mom's the most proud mom of me getting pot to kids as quick as I can.
That's fantastic. But at what point did you reach out to the other family?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, the other family was, little Charlotte Figgy and her mom, Paige. So Charlotte's Web is named after this little girl. And it wasn't until Zakai became seizure free. So my first call, the 3 phone numbers was the lab. I called the lab first, talked to the biochemist. My second call was to Joel Stanley, the creator of Charlotte's Web. And then my third, after Zakai was literally in remission, was to Paige, to kind of reach out to her and say, how is Charlotte doing? And here's how Zakai's doing. And what are we going to do? We've got to tell the world about this. We've got to, really got to do this. And that was the beginning of Realm of Caring Foundation.
Now, let me ask a question real quick, just for the listeners that may not know anything about when things were passed in Colorado. When you first started administering cannabis, now, was it legal, medicinal? Was that a risk? Was it, kind of walk us through that piece? I'm just curious.
Yeah. So in 2012, we had medical cannabis in the state of Colorado. And if you're under 18, you needed 2 doctors' recommendations in order to administer that to a child.
I see.
And you have to have certain qualifying conditions. And it was medical cannabis at that point. So it is not hemp in 2012. And so that was the landscape. In fact, our neurologist was the first neurologist to make a recommendation for a child. Paige never received her first, what they call a red card, like your cannabis license. She never received that back then. She sent it all in and they just kind of ignored it. And I think because our neurologist signed it, we got ours back. And so that made me, and yes, I called Department of Human Services. I said, hey, the only thing worse than watching your child seize is not watching your child at all. So I need to know that I'm not going to be under some sort of investigation. I'm going to go through this process, all of this. It was sketchy, back then.
I can't even imagine. But like you said, but at that point, you were willing to try anything, right? All options, you're going to try it. So, by the way, kudos to the doctor too for being the first one to step up. I think that's awesome as well.
Yeah, definitely.
That's fantastic. So you and Paige, right, get together and you're talking about how are we going to help, share this information. Yeah. Let's dive into that for Realm of Caring. Go ahead.
Yeah, sure. We definitely needed to tell families that this was an option. And that's it's an obligation, especially, in our community with families who are dealing with catastrophic epilepsies. And now we serve many other people, but back then it was, these are our friends and they're in the same boat we're in. And if, standing on our head for 10 minutes before bed worked, that would have been what we were talking about. If it was dandelion root, and sometimes I wish it was, that's what we would have, found the mountaintop and started screaming about, but it wasn't. It was this plant. And so we really needed to get the word out to families. That was the initial sort of function of Realm of Caring was, look, we will tell you what we've been doing. That's all we can tell you. We can tell you exactly what we have been taking, kind of our path, what we took, our journey, how we did this, how we accessed it. We would talk about quality, those kinds of things. And and we'd get families to Colorado. It was medical cannabis then, and it was landlocked here in Colorado. So that was kind of the original orientation of Realm of Caring.
I see. And now, was it just, were you guys just telling your friends through like social media and just trying to help? And then later you're like, listen, we need to start a not-for-profit, or did you know right away?
Yeah, well, we started with a private, closed Facebook page.
I see. Okay.
For security reasons and privacy reasons. That's what we started with, and we would add folks to that. And we created, I remember it being like an 11-page document. I talked to some legal counsel. They're like, well, just make sure that families like sign this release, and then you can give them the information. We were dealing with really, really sick families. And that's what we did. And we started a grasshopper phone number so that volunteers kind of answered at one point we had 30 volunteers answering the phone, and people could reach out and call, and we would answer about 1,000 calls a month that way. And I was so proud of that.
1,000 calls just through the Facebook, the private Facebook page. Wow. Between
that and, the other thing that Paige and I were pretty adamant about was trying to kind of put this on the national radar. And so we were actively seeking a way to tell our stories. And so we thought, the first CNN special came out in August of 2013. Mm-hmm. So we got started in 2012. By 2013, we had some families. We had around probably 400 or so families at that point, and so it was more, we were seeing things, and we weren't trying to make sense of that. We just knew something was happening here, and that this needs to be an available option. And so we thought, we did CNN and we did NBC, and we thought that would kind of be the end of it. We thought, we're just going to tell this nationally. Hey, then the cat's out of the bag. Everybody knows this is an option, and we can kind of move on with life. But
okay, all right.
Yeah, that definitely wasn't the case. What happened was more families being in need, and us needing to figure out some systems to take care of those families, and that's when the nonprofit.
So at that point, right before that, you're just volunteering your own time.
Yes. And many years after the nonprofit started, we were volunteering our own time. Absolutely.
You're not making any money. You're in there, and there's no money. There's no money coming in at that point. It's just all volunteers at that point.
Absolutely. These were all families whose lives had been changed positively by this. And this was a way to pay it forward, really. Wow. And that's what it was for me. And I know that, and for me, Realm of Caring is really a way to make meaning. Steve, listen, if your child is sick and this helps them, my son Seizures went into remission within 3 months.
That's great.
It's gonna, and we dealt with almost a decade of suffering. One of two things are going to happen. You're going to go crazy because you're like, why couldn't I have found this when he was 6 months old? Or you're going to make meaning of that decade. And Realm of Caring in some ways is very self-serving. It's how I make meaning of this decade of suffering. So I'm still somewhat sane.
How did you come up with the name, A Realm of Caring? How'd that happen?
We had a fiscal sponsorship from another nonprofit. That's pretty common in the nonprofit world. And so there was another nonprofit that was going to lend us their EIN so we could start raising money right away. Oh. And so they actually went out of business, and so we kept the name. We added foundation, so they were Realm of Caring, and we became Realm of Caring Foundation.
I see. So many years of volunteering. There's no money coming in. Nobody's getting paid. Tons of sacrifice, but it was the right thing to do. You're changing.
Yeah.
It's feeling great, and then at some point you start getting sponsorship. Let's talk. That had to feel good when you finally were able to start actually, getting donations and raising funds. I'm guessing that was a wonderful moment.
It absolutely was. And it started early and small. I remember, a woman who needed to displace funds at the end of the year. And that was actually, at the end of 2000 and in our beginning at the end of 2014. And that was really just a little bit of lifeblood that made me go, okay, we need to create some business model, around this. And in order for us to succeed and for us to grow and for us to be who it is that we need to be for this community, we really need to create some, a business model around this. And so that's what we did, and started to reach out to industry to receive sponsorship, and also individual donors who just really believed in what it is that we were doing, whether that's, my parents who contribute every single month, people who know the lives that we've lived and then can see the contrast. The families are incredibly, incredibly supportive. And so, and that was January of 2015 was actually when we opened an office, hired a staff, payroll, that kind of thing. So it was a lot of years of sprinting and just making it happen.
And for the listeners to fully understand it, it's not like you were a CEO of a $100 million company before. You're learning on the fly how to be a CEO and run a nonprofit and just building it from scratch, right? I mean, you're just doing it. You're just going for it.
Yeah, I mean, the most experience I'd had previously was in the restaurant industry. So I did manage restaurants, and so that's where the systems orientation and really say, and customer service really, because when you've got volunteers, the only thing you say is thank you to the volunteers. If I wanted to establish standards and customer service standards and how are we measuring our success here in serving this community, well, then you have to pay people. And right. So it became, we've really got to get elevated here. And so that, yeah. Wow. So I definitely had some business experience prior to, and all of that experience helped in some way. It was so fortuitous. It's like everything that I had done previously culminated in having the right background to be able to create Realm of Caring.
I gotcha. And so what have been the most challenging parts? If you had to just pick two or three, and we've touched on a little bit of the sacrifice early on, but let's talk about the biggest hurdles of starting a nonprofit, and then can you roll that into the biggest hurdles of being involved in the cannabis industry and just some of the challenges you've faced?
Yeah.
With both of those.
Yeah, I think definitely. I think, the biggest challenge to running a nonprofit in particular is that we somehow think nonprofits are playing by different rules, and we're not using traditional business model with nonprofit, and so then you run into funding issues. And when you run into funding issues, then you have issues with hiring the right people because you can't pay them enough because they can go to the for-profit industry and make twice as much. And so, if I had to pick a single biggest challenge in nonprofit, I'd say, that's what it is. And then, the challenges in being in the cannabis industry, I mean, especially early on, besides, it just being illegal federally, right. Which is extremely challenging, I would say is, the stigma associated with the plant. I think that's one of the, just kind of the biggest issues, which has changed dramatically. Like the first NBC special that came out on Zakai was called Pot for Tots. And I cringed, yes. I just, we don't call it that. We jokingly call it that. Like I said, my mom's so proud I get pot to kids. It's cannabis. It is a plant. We talk about it scientifically. We know the mechanism of action, and they sensationalized it, and they kind of, it actually said, this mom's conducting a drug deal. And I'm walking in, to the dispensary, and I was like, what did they just do to this story,
Oh my gosh. I'm guessing you were calling people.
Yeah. And then, oh my gosh, don't read the comments. It's like people's misunderstanding about what this is. And that was, that was the beginning. The last Dateline special was called Growing Hope. And it featured our families who were changing the world legislatively. And it was like, yes, we are getting somewhere. Exactly. So I would say that was the initial challenges. I think we're overcoming a lot of those in a lot of ways. But cannabis is difficult too, just because of, the disparate difference between federal and state. And so imagine how hard, the listeners know how hard it is to build a business. Now imagine having to rebuild that over and over again, because then your bank account gets shut down, or your payment processor's over with, or your shipping, person says, okay, we're not shipping this any longer. Or labeling, something new comes down from the FDA and you're like, got to redo. These are thousands and thousands of dollars decisions, and having to rebuild all the time. So yeah, cannabis industry, I'm so proud of folks that are being successful in this industry, because it's hard.
You touched on something there that I think is really important. It is super hard to start a company and run it, period, in any industry, any product line. I mean, it's everybody that thinks they want to be an entrepreneur, it's all sexy and fun until they actually start doing it, and they wake up every day and look outside and hope their car's still there and it didn't get repossessed because they're behind their bills.
Right.
But to start something in a nonprofit is even harder. And then, like you said, throw cannabis in the mix. Holy cow. Yeah. I mean,
it's tough.
What you guys have built is really tremendous. Over the last, so how many years now? 7? Right?
7.
Yeah, the last 7 years. I mean, really phenomenal. And you've grown it to the point now, when you talk about where you've brought the organization to, and forgive me for asking this question because I'm not familiar, but how do you measure it? Is it families? Is it donations? Is it? I don't know. How do you measure the size of your organization exactly?
Yeah, what a great question, and I think that's something that the listeners need to figure out for their own businesses, whether it's nonprofit or for-profit. How are we going to measure success?
Yeah.
So for us, I'll tell you what we're up to now. So part of the, measuring the success for me is how we've evolved and be able to really meet the families that we serve need, and I should say the community's need. So currently what we do is we conduct research so that we can educate. Okay. And previously, we've been involved in legislative work. We've helped 22 states pass cannabis legislation in the course of about 2.5 years. So that was a lot of the original work we don't do anymore because it's not needed.
I see.
and so that's one really important success indicator is, are we adapting and changing to meet the needs no matter what your business is? And so I think that's a really important thing. Now, how do you validate what those needs are? Ours, we do through literal research with Johns Hopkins University. So when I say we conduct research, we have the largest registry in the United States, soon to be the world, tracking the largest population using cannabinoid therapy.
Okay, I didn't know that. Okay, great. Yep.
And we have 4 other studies as well. I usually talk about our largest because what we're able to do is pull out what the barriers are that our families are dealing with. And our programs and services, so we have this validated registry. It's gone through the Institutional Review Board at Johns Hopkins. We've got all these great measurements. We can spit out data. And it's beautiful, and we know what their barriers are, and all of our programs meet those barriers.
I see.
So we developed a call center. Before we did that organically with volunteers. Now we have a call center that has created 284,000 touch points since 2015.
Wow.
And so, data is another way to measure your success. Mm-hmm. We serve 50, we looked yesterday because we just submitted a letter for an FDA hearing. 56,701 individuals are registered with Realm of Caring. And these are primarily folks who are dealing with, some sort of health condition.
Mm-hmm. With those calls, can I ask real quick, the average call? So when somebody calls in, most of the time, is it, hey, where can I find the product and what product should I buy? Or is it, hey, I want to use this, but I'm scared because my family members are going to, think bad of me? Or is it, just simply educate me on it? What's the average call, or what's the majority call, I guess, is the question?
Steve, the answer is yes. I mean, it is everything. It's all the way from my neighbor told me to call about this CME stuff, and you're like, CBD? I mean, they know nothing, and you're starting, at the very beginning, all the way to, my loved one or I've been using this, for several years. Things have kind of fallen off. I'm, looking for a little bit of guidance. So it's really important for me to say, we don't give medical advice, but we have been tracking this population for a really long time. And we want to give that information back to the community. So how we position that is if you were to call, you do recognize, you go through the process to recognize, hey, I'm not receiving medical advice, because we're not giving medical advice. What we're giving you is data, our collective data. We're also happy to point the way and show you peer-reviewed published research in regards to this. And there is a little bit of art. They have been on the phone over 2 million minutes in the call center. So they know how to work with families and to tell them this is what you need to present to your doctor and that kind of thing. So the calls are all over the place, and we're very, very relationship oriented. We do get calls of, how do I have this discussion with my family? And we'll walk them through that. How do I have this discussion with my doctor? I've got lupus. How does CBD work? We'll walk through how CBD works on the autoimmune system, for example. So all the way to very detailed information, potential drug interactions they need to be sharing with their doctor, all the way to, they're just checking in. I just wanted to tell you, thank you so much. Our life has changed so dramatically. When's your next event? How can I give back? Whatever that is.
That's got to be so rewarding. I mean, you've built something here that it's changing people's lives. It's improving their health. That's got to be so rewarding to improve their health and just make all those differences. But on top of that, now you've also built this organization that has employees, and you're helping those lives, right? These are employees that are sending their kids to school or paying their mortgage because you're changing their lives too. And so you've built this system now to where all these people are being helped and being affected in a positive way. And for the people that donate, they're looking for causes to donate to. And now they have another avenue. I mean, you put all that together, which is really fantastic. Awesome.
Oh, thank you so much. Everybody I know wants to save, change, or impact the world. And them investing in our mission is one way for them to do it. So, yeah, and then we use lots of other metrics to measure success. I mean, even our call center allows folks to rate us. So we take a customer service, rating. We're pretty obsessive about making sure that, we're doing a good job and that we're collecting data at every single avenue that we can. So, yeah, I think every industry is going to look different. Every business is going to look different. And you've got to sort of create what is the value here that we've established and then figure out, how to measure it.
When you look back now, would you, let's say you had a time machine and you could go back and visit with Heather and give her some advice on how to start a nonprofit or how to be a first-time CEO, what are some things you'd tell her?
Yeah, man, what a great question. I think that I love that question. I think that if I had to go back and give myself some advice, especially as a CEO, I would, and most people are going to come in to, an organization that's built. It's not often that people are going to actually found the organization. So, if you're coming into, I think, a new organization, you're a first time executive and you're kind of coming in, I would say, that advice to me is, it's pretty simple it's shut up. And really to listen. If you're coming into the organization, you need to be a good listener. You have been brought in because of your expertise, but your team is the expert. And I think that's really, people, I think they're, they come in and they just want to start making all these changes and they're going to see inefficiencies and they're going to want to just jump right in and they're going to want to do all of these things. And I think the very first thing that needs to happen, especially to establish credibility, is to be quiet, to listen, to pay attention to what's happening. And then I would say, resist the urge to do the work for the team. So what's generally going to happen is chaos is going to develop, and chaos is a really good sign that transformation is on the horizon, and that's uncomfortable, but to just sort of, to embrace that. So I think, that's some advice I'd have for folks that are kind of coming in new as an executive. And advice to the other question is advice to myself when I was young.
Yep. Go ahead. Yeah. Some advice to Heather. She's 21, or whatever age you want to pick. Yeah. Looking back now, are there some things you would, give yourself some advice on?
Oh, definitely. Are you kidding? Definitely. I would think, for me, I'd say, and maybe other people will resonate with this, especially when you're young or you're young now, is to really kind of raise your head up and get out of the grind. So when I was 21, I was managing restaurants. I had just had my first son. I was very, very driven, very, 3 foot, 5 foot level. And the younger you can raise your head up, kind of get out of the grind a little bit, even when you're that young, and begin to develop your life goals, your especially establishing your values, discovering what brings excitement, what sets your soul on fire, figuring that out young, even if while you're there, you're not going to be able to transition. Because if you don't have a goal, if you don't have the pearl, what I call the pearl that you're hanging on to in your hand, if you don't figure that out, you're going to waste a lot of years. Mm-hmm. And so I think that is, even when you're young, continue to put in that work, learn everything that you can doing what you're doing, but discovering where it is that you want to go, being the hardest worker in that room, and establishing that and finding a few mentors, figuring out your values, your life plan, even though it's going to change 80 times, it is, right. It's going to change. But if you don't have those goals, and if you don't kind of get out of the weeds and have that conversation with yourself about what's important with you, for you and for your family, then, you're probably going to wallow for who knows how long. So that's what I would say.
I get that almost that same answer from just about every CEO, every that's more. They all say something similar. It's very they'll say things like, "Well, I wish I would have found some more passions and enjoyed life and lifted my head up, out of the grind." Mm-hmm. Like you just said. I love that description. They all talk about that, how they just, and it's great that we have this work ethic, when we're younger and we kill ourselves. That's awesome.
I know.
But if you're killing yourself, that's not tied to a passion, and you're not lifting your head up to enjoy life a little bit. Yeah. Next thing you wake up, you're 40 and you're like, oh man, I just burned 20 years. And so,
and get as much varied experience as you can. You know what I mean? Like, generalists there. I just listened to a great podcast recently that was about, generalist in your early years, getting as much varied experience as you can. So when you're later, you can be the specialist.
That's great. Good stuff. I know I've kept you on here a long time already, but can I just switch gears for a second? I want to ask about, because we give a lot of job interviewing tips on this podcast as well. Mm-hmm. And you've interviewed, a ton of people, hired a ton of people, managed people for years and years now. A couple of questions around job interviewing.
Sure.
What are some things, if you're interviewing folks, let's just assume for a minute that their skill set matches the job description. So putting that aside, what do you look for in their characteristics when you're visiting with somebody? What's the magic for Heather to decide to hire them?
For better or for worse, for me, it's heart. I have always hired for heart, and you've got to spend the time to realize who that individual is sitting in front of you and what their heart dictates. And this is assuming they've got the skill set, of course.
Right. Yep.
And then I would say that the other really important thing that should not be overlooked is creating diversity in the team. So if you look at research, the only only researchable indicator of a successful team, and even C-suite, is diversity amongst that team. Period. You can't look at these resumes and their CV and say, okay, this person and this person and this. You've got to create diversity, and so knowing your team, knowing their strengths, because not everybody's going to be great at everything, and they shouldn't be, and you fill in then and create diversification amongst the team. So yeah, those are the heart and diversity.
Awesome. Do you have a couple of favorite questions you like to ask, or a favorite question you like to ask?
Mine usually is extremely organic and responsive to, how they're answering questions. I really like to rely on my gut, and everyone has a gut. So I think that's good. And I think to not move so quickly, I think sometimes in fact, you're going to pay for that later. So taking your time through the process, because that could lead to turnover later if you don't have the right candidate. And so I think really taking your time.
Let me ask you another question. By the way, for the listeners, they're starting to feel it now. For those that don't know you, your dynamic personality. I mean, you're just one of those people that folks like to be around. You just have this energy about you, and we're getting that on the call today. And so I could talk to you for another 2 hours is the point. But I want to hit you with one last question. So usually I'll always ask the guests this question. I ask this, for everybody. I'll say, tell me, what's your core purpose in life when you wake up every day? And you're living your core purpose, so to speak, right? What you've built is kind of tied to your core purpose, I would think. But if you had to define your core purpose now at this stage in life, where you're at today, if you had to put that in a sentence or two, what would you say Heather's core purpose is?
For me, where I'm at now, it revolves around creating community.
Okay.
I think that is the most important thing for me. Where I'm at right now in life has been creating a community around really suffering, which can kind of sound a little bit morbid, but I'm really sort of obsessed with grief, and which is an odd thing to be obsessed with, because I have a totally different perspective on that now, having lived through what we've lived through with Zakai and being around a lot of other families who are living through suffering and grief. So for me, it's creating community, and it is about, we all, what do we want to be when we grow up? This is a question, and I think that I rather would have it be around what problem are we going to solve.
I love that.
And I think that's it for me.
I'm super proud to know you. I love the fact that Riderflex gets to work with your organization on some recruiting. It's really a special thing to be involved with. What you've built, I really commend you for everything you and your team have done. I'm super happy for you. It's got to feel good putting your head on your pillow every night knowing that you're changing lives.
Totally. Completely exhausted. The day ends with no potential left in it, and my face hurts from smiling so much. And Steve, thank you for helping me find the right hearts and the right people to carry our mission forward, because it's never about a CEO. I mean, if you're the smartest person at the table, there's a problem.
You got that right.
You've got to surround yourself with an amazing team. And so thank you. And thank you to Riderflex for helping us do that.
You bet, Heather. Thank you for being on the show, and we'll talk soon, okay?
I appreciate it. Thanks, Steve.
Bye-bye. That was Heather Jackson on the Riderflex podcast, the co-founder and CEO of Realm of Caring. You can contact them by visiting their website at theroc.us. Again, that's theroc.us, or call 719-347-5400. We truly hope you find our material helpful and entertaining. And while our podcast can be heard across most platforms, including iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, YouTube, and SoundCloud. You can become a supporter of this podcast by visiting our show on the platform Anchor FM. That's anchor.fm/Riderflex. You can also send us your questions or suggested topics for future episodes to the email address podcast@riderflex.com or drop us a voicemail at 888-964-5876, extension 710. Visit riderflex.com to learn more about us. Thanks so much for listening, folks, and have a great day.